Welcome back to the Former Fat Friend podcast. Today, I am so thrilled to have a special guest joining us. Zoe Schroeder is the lead dietitian at the Pound of Cure weight loss program, where she works closely with bariatric patients and those using GLP-1 medications, guiding them towards sustainable long-term weight loss success. What I love about Zoe, I've been following her on Instagram for a while, and what I love about her and what I think you'll appreciate too is how she combines her extensive expertise in nutrition with more practical, down-to-earth approaches. So she really has this gift for kind of simplifying nutrition science into something that's actually doable. And I think that makes a huge difference for people who are trying to navigate this post-surgery life or weight loss journeys with GLP-1s. So we're going to dive into some of her strategies for long-term success. I want to talk about some of the common pitfalls that you see with people after bariatric surgery and using GLP-1s. And we're going to talk about how you help your patients build these really healthy habits for life. Plus, I want to learn a little bit more about your passion for food and how that plays into how you work with your patients. So we're going to talk about all of this stuff. I think it's going to be a really great episode. So Zoe, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm very excited for today, and thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love if we could start by just learning a little bit more about you. How did you get into this field working with bariatric patients and those on GLP-1 medications?
Yes, absolutely. Well, like so many people and specifically so many dietitians, I feel like there's always a personal passion or there's a personal story associated in their own life that brings them down the path in terms of career. And especially with nutrition, most dietitians have some sort of their own journey with nutrition in order to fuel that passion, and that definitely was the case for me as well. I never even knew that what a dietitian was, or that there was even the a possibility of having a career in this space. I started college with the intention to be a nurse and went through my own weight loss journey and struggled with fad dieting and that restriction binge cycle. And it was only until I really actually dug into the science of nutrition and switched my major in college to nutrition and really started applying this the science on what our body needs, and also that kind of more so mindset and personal development, healing the relationship with food piece, that together really worked incredible magic in my own life. And although I was never obese by a BMI chart, I can definitely relate to the dieting struggle and so much of what the patients and clients that I work with struggle with. And that really helped accelerate my passion for finding those people that I can help, and that it's so important to be able to have that conversation and show what life can be like once you're on the other side, and truly see the beauty and the magic of fueling your body, letting go of diet culture and kind of that toxic cycle that can really keep so many people trapped on that yo-yo dieting roller coaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you touched on your own weight loss journey and how that kind of affected how you kind of approach this. And I think that's something I've learned is that whether you've been clinically obese or you've just struggled to lose a little bit of weight, that experience is the same. And sometimes I think we think like, oh, well, if you 20 pounds is nothing, you don't understand what it's like. But I actually have learned this more recently in talking to my own sister, who in my mind was always like, this very thin, very fit person. And as I've shared more of my journey with bariatric surgery, she's opened up and shared more about kind of her more recent like struggles and desires to get fitter and lose weight. And so I think that's such a universal experience and really important that you have that perspective working with bariatric patients. Even if you haven't had bariatric surgery, you do kind of understand that struggle that they're going through. And I think that's so important. I'm curious, what do you think makes working with bariatric patients unique compared to a general weight loss population?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think this is something that diet culture and the media has really gotten wrong in terms of messaging of, well, you want to lose weight, you just need more willpower, or you just need to eat less and exercise more. And for so many people who have struggled with their weight for years and decades, it's not that simple. And we know that obesity is a disease uh, of metabolic dysfunction. And for most of the people in the bariatric space, whether they decide to get bariatric surgery or go on a GLP-1, it's not for a lack of trying, and it's not for a lack of wanting it or working hard. And most of the patients that I work with on this journey, they're some of the hardest working people that I know in terms of their dedication to this journey, and they just need that extra tool, the extra push to really help their metabolism know what to do again, because there's so much hormonal dysregulation and that metabolic disease that has really impacted their ability to lose weight sustainably.
Yeah. So in your experience, do you think that most people who are clinically obese need a tool, or are there people who that traditional advice of eat less, move more, it's a calories in, calories out problem? Are there
Mm.
people for whom that's sufficient to lose weight and keep it off long term?
It's a really great question. And I think it's really nuanced and depends on the person, how long, generally like younger people who are clinically obese that maybe haven't had the decades of, going on and off different diets and gaining and losing the same, 30 and then 35 and then 30 and then 35, kind of creeping up on that weight trajectory. So I would say that there is a portion of that population who can see really great changes in their body composition by really but it requires so much work, right? I'm sure we've all seen like these weight loss transformations on social media, where it's like the course of a year or whatever, and there's a significant weight loss. And now we don't know if there's a tool involved or not, because you never can truly believe what you see on social media. However, with that being said, going back to your question, I think some people can absolutely see great change with that. But I would say for a lot of people who have been struggling for a long time and who've tried many things, a medical tool to aid in that weight loss is pretty necessary, especially if it's a matter of accelerating the process and providing that positive feedback, right? This can be such a frustrating journey, especially when we know that the scale will not always do what we want it to do. But
Mhm.
having positive reinforcement and building momentum is huge in terms of sustainable habit change. And so, if we can utilize a medical tool to help with that weight loss, to build the momentum, and it's so much easier to build really great habits and change your lifestyle when you're having the positive reinforcement of seeing that scale go down. Because if you're just busting your butt and going and you're not seeing any change, it's not going to give you enough motivation to actually sustain that change. So I think
Yeah.
the combination of the two can really do wonders for so many people.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I can distinctly remember doing Whole 30, which is, if you don't know, it's like a cut out all sugar, you cut out legumes, basically just a really restrictive eating plan of whole foods, which is not a bad thing. It's eating a lot of healthy things, which is great. I did it for a month and I did it meticulously. Like I was so strict with it and I did feel really good. And I lost 10 pounds in that month, which was great and exciting. The second that I introduced anything outside of that Whole 30 plan, I gained that 10 pounds right back. And it was so disheartening that it was like, why would I like keep working this hard at this diet that's really difficult to do when I'm not seeing any results from it? So I think that's a really often overlooked part of a weight loss journey, which is like, it's not that people aren't putting in the work, but it's really hard to keep putting in that work when you're not getting the returns from it. And I think that's what bariatric surgery did for me in part, was it gave me that positive feedback of like, yeah, okay, this is hard in the beginning. You're, very restricted in what you can eat and you have to really think about all of it, but I'm losing weight and I keep keeping it off. And that allowed me to have months which turned into years, which turned into multiple years of building those habits where now it doesn't feel hard. It just feels like second nature. But I think that's so such a good insight into kind of what the mental aspect of weight loss is.
Yeah. It's just what you do. This is who you are. This is the life that you live. And it's not necessarily needing, it's, you still have to put effort, obviously, but it's not so much of, I have to make this conscious decision and it feels hard. And that's
Hmm.
getting through that hump and building in the consistency and doing, it's not the sexy piece, right? The consistency is not the fun, sexy piece, but the more that you do it and the more that you can align yourself with that new identity of the person who does these things, and this is just the lifestyle that I have, it is when it truly becomes that lifelong success. So I'm really happy to hear that you've been able to embody that so well too.
Yeah. So I actually first heard of the Pound of Cure weight loss program. I think I was about 8 or 9 months post-op, and Dr. Weiner wrote a book, and it was really interesting take, I thought, from a bariatric surgeon that was a little bit unique from what I had heard other bariatric surgeons talk about. Can you explain just sort of generally what is the Pound of Cure weight loss program?
Yeah, so absolutely. The Pound of Cure, which is, the title of the book that he wrote, I believe about 13 years ago. It's the name of our practice and our nutrition kind of philosophy. And it really boils down to eating whole, real, unprocessed food as much as possible. Now you mentioned Whole 30, right? From my perspective, it's more about the addition rather than focusing on the restriction. And that's something that I work with patients on all the time. When I have a one-on-one with somebody, we don't automatically go to, oh, you have to cut this, this, and this is out. It's a, how can we add more of this? How can we add more of this? How can we add more of this? And it naturally crowds out those other foods. But going back to the Pound of Cure kind of nutrition philosophy, the title of A Pound of Cure comes from the main the holy grail, which is to work towards eating up at least a pound of vegetables every day. And why that's important is because I don't like to explain vegetables and adding in that extra as much as you can, feeling unlimited in your vegetables. That's this ultimate weight loss hack and weight maintenance hack of, if you're feeling hungry, you're going to be thinking about food more. And if you're thinking about food more and that food noise is louder, you're probably not thinking like, oh gosh, I wish I could eat more broccoli today. It's, you're thinking about those foods you're trying to avoid because it's not aligned with your goal. But eventually your hunger always wins, right? It always ends up backfiring the more you ignore that hunger. So adding in as much volume. Now, of course, if you've had bariatric surgery or if you're on a GLP-1, the volume is restricted. But as I'm sure you're well aware, as time goes on, you naturally start to feel hungrier. You naturally can eat a bigger volume of food. And I always encourage people to, if you're feeling hungry, I want you to eat more. And it's about, what are we adding more of? And so, specifically with the Pound of Cure weight loss program and nutrition philosophy, it's at least a pound of vegetables. Another huge piece of it is that you can eat as much fruit as you want. And I know fruit can be really triggering for people who've done keto and other diets in the past, right?
Yeah.
Because we are taught to fear the sugar in fruit. And yet, we don't fear the sugar in other things, right? Or it's like, it just doesn't really add up.
Yeah.
Fruit is kind of that highest level of sweetness found in nature, and we want that to be celebrated and enjoyed. And so I always like to say, as long as you're having more vegetables than fruit, have as much dang fruit as you want. You do not need to be afraid of eating bananas or, pineapple, mango, pineapple, the high sugar fruits. Like, you don't have to only eat berries. And so really allowing yourself that abundance, right? More about the addition rather than the restriction. And, again, it boils down to eating as much unprocessed food as much as possible. And I think that's something that is really beneficial long term, especially for bariatric patients who, for many people, are kind of in the mindset of that they have to drink protein shakes the rest of their life, right? Or it's like forcing themselves to eat the same small amount that they ate during the honeymoon period when they actually want to be and can tolerate eating more. So
Mhm.
that's something that I think is really unique about our approach.
Yeah. So a pound of vegetables sounds like a lot. How do you For bariatric patients who have limited capacity, how do you balance that with other nutritional needs like hitting protein targets?
Yeah, great question. Now, the metabolic reset diet, which is kind of that first piece of the Pound of Cure program, it is really appropriate for people who are maybe gearing up for surgery or over a year out from surgery, or as they're on a GLP-1, depending on how high their doses and their tolerance and that kind of thing. I like to think about it as you can implement a modified approach where you're not forcing yourself to eat past the point of fullness, but you're allowing yourself to add that extra volume whenever necessary. Now, of course, we want to prioritize protein, especially during that honeymoon period. But as we're more so in a weight maintenance period, maybe after you've reached the goal weight and you're battling that extra hunger, that's where we can kind of swap, make produce the focus and protein comes more secondary. But especially during that acute weight loss phase or the honeymoon period, prioritizing protein, ideally through whole foods. That's what you're going to be eating first. And then supplementing, adding in that extra volume as much as possible with the vegetables and the fruit. But again, listening to your body, honoring that hunger, and also honoring the satiety. So having that mindful eating approach, which not only helps you feel comfortable and not sick like right after surgery, but also a skill that's so valuable for long-term weight maintenance too.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I ignored the instructions in the book and I tried to do the metabolic reset when I was like 10 months post-op and it didn't go well for me. I still had way too much restriction to try to do that. So definitely if you read the book, follow the instructions. And like Zoe said, it's much more appropriate for someone who's, more than a year post-op. I'm curious how you would approach a bariatric patient who, let's say they're several years post-op, but they also have very high activity goals. So maybe they're working out in the gym and they're trying to put on muscle, or they are running, wanting to run a marathon or a half marathon. How does the Pound of Cure program fit with those kinds of goals?
That's a really great question. And I think it's also so nuanced in that depends on the person and their energy needs and what they're expending. So in terms of somebody who is exercising a lot and really needing to have that extra, maybe we have to actually add in a little bit of extra protein or be more intentional about those starchy vegetables or the whole grains and add that in. And that's something where even though it's not on the metabolic reset diet, the strict metabolic reset diet of having like grains, for example, like oats or quinoa or something along those lines, it's not that we don't expect you to never have that. In fact, we want to add it back in with intention and moderation, just not what we're filling up on. However, with somebody with really, a lot of exercise that they're doing, we need to make sure we're fueling that exercise so that their body has the energy it needs so that you can push yourself. You don't want to be busting your butt in the gym and then not optimizing your nutrition to really get the most out of that. So I would work on like timing, maybe having a pre-workout snack that has some complex healthy carbohydrates in it, and then making sure we're timing that protein afterwards as well. And again, kind of how you're eating throughout the day, those small frequent mini meals to get the overall needs in without pushing the volume in an uncomfortable way.
hmm Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's one of the challenges that I've experienced as I get further post-op and I am increasing my activity. It's like, how do I make sure I'm eating enough that I'm actually getting the results I should be getting from the work that I'm putting
Yeah.
in the gym? Also, it's really hard to balance hunger because you feel so much hungrier when you're exercising. And it's like, I went from being like never hungry to wanting to eat all the time when I was running a lot. And I'm like, I don't know how to handle this. And so
Hmm.
I think it's a hard thing. And also I don't like to track. So that makes it a lot harder because it's like, how do you know if you're hitting your targets? And if you're hungry, do you just always eat protein all the time or do you start to bring in some veggies? So I think it makes sense that working on timing, kind of focusing on what you're eating before those workouts, all of that's really important. I am curious, as I talk about it, what are your thoughts on tracking both in the short term after bariatric surgery or when you started GLP-1 and also long term?
Great question. So, tracking is for many people can be a very beneficial tool, not an end all be all. It's not what we want to be doing long term, but it can be a tool to build awareness around your patterns or, maybe potential triggers even in your day. It can also be a tool to really learn what it is that your body needs and then use that awareness to wean off of the tracking and eat more intuitively, but with that knowledge that you learned. However, I do not have patients track like specifically bariatric patients who've had surgery or who are on GLP-1s track unless we're maybe exercising a lot and making sure we're hitting specific protein targets more so than tracking in an app with specific calories and that sort of thing. Um, what could be helpful is doing more of a food journaling situation where it's maybe you use a journal, a piece of paper and a pen, and then more than just what it is that you're eating, have that bit of reflection. And this is maybe less on the specifically the exercise piece of it, but more just in general of if someone's in a plateau or they're wanting to take things to the next level or they're experiencing some behaviors that they can't quite figure out why, having that next little piece of reflection of how did I feel before and after this meal? How hungry was I? What were the circumstances around this meal? Was it something that I had prepped and planned out, or was I super stressed and I got the drive through on the way home, or had I not eaten all day and this is what? And so just kind of like having that internal dialogue and that bit of reflection can be really helpful for again bringing awareness to then look back and identify patterns. But with Pound of Cure, we're really big on, you don't need to track your food to hit a specific calorie target when you're focusing on the overall quality of the food and whole foods. Mostly, you don't necessarily, especially if you're in that kind of acute weight loss phase, we don't need to worry so much about specific calories. I always recommend the only number I really care about, especially with whether it's GLP-1s or post bariatric surgery, would be the protein and the fluids. Those are the main thing. And then like if you want to track another thing, if you're on the metabolic reset diet, track how close you're getting to a pound of
Yeah.
vegetables, right? So it really does depend on the person. And then that's why I think having a conversation is so important because everybody's different and there are approaches that work with some people who that don't work with other people. And tracking can be very triggering for some people, especially with disordered eating history and maybe more of that obsessive relation. If you find yourself being super obsessive with stepping on the scale every day, then maybe tracking every bite of food that goes into your mouth won't necessarily be all that beneficial in the long run either. So also being honest and self-reflective to know if this is something that I'm using as a tool and data, or am I, kind of teetering on that obsessive disordered eating side of things.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think I'm always just looking for validation for my lack of tracking, someone to tell me like, you're fine. But I think you're right. It is definitely context dependent. And like for me right now, I want to be building muscle. I've been working out with a personal trainer, haven't been seeing the muscle gains that I want to. And he even said to me yesterday, he's like, yeah, maybe you should like, track your protein, see where you're at. And it's like, oh, okay. I know you're right. I just don't really want to do it. So, um,
Mm.
it might be like a short term thing just to get the data for a little bit, see where I'm at, and then I can
Yeah.
let go of
It
it
could
later.
even be just like write it down on a day, like a typical day. Okay, I have this yogurt. Okay, 15 grams protein. Then I have my this, and this. And you maybe the only metric that you write down is the protein, and you don't really worry about the rest of it. And then just kind of use that as, oh, okay, this is where I'm at a typical day. Oh, wow, I am actually low. If I add this into my snack, then I'll be there. So maybe just, again, it could just be a 1 day kind of seeing where you're at.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things I think is really interesting about Dr. Weiner and the Pound of Cure program is that you guys were some of the first to really incorporate GLP-1s into your program, both for bariatric patients and the first time users or non bariatric patients. I'm curious if in the last couple of years that you've seen more of an influx of GLP-1 patients, is there anything about those patients, any unique challenges that they face or unique dietary needs that they have that a bariatric patient might not?
Really great question. We see a lot of parallels because it works in a similar way that that first year after surgery works, right? By really more so than the volume restriction is that hormonal regulation. And so I would say unique challenges, it's quite similar, to be honest. It's, we're prioritizing protein, filling in the gaps with produce, prioritizing hydration because they are also prone to dehydration with the medication, combating nausea via mindful eating, and maybe it's something that would be unique is that nausea and or symptoms associated right around that injection day. So maybe the next couple days they're not able to eat as much, or we're relying more on protein shakes than the last couple days of the week, and more so riding that flux over the days versus it being more consistent with bariatric patients. And the other thing too is that just like bariatric surgery, where people can have all sorts of different responses and really effectiveness, we see that with the GLP-1s as well. There's kind of a bell curve in terms of responsiveness, where 10% of the population who are taking a GLP-1 are super responders and they can stay on that really low dose, and maybe they feel really nauseous even at such a low dose, and they can stay there for a while, and we can work with that. The majority of people are kind of in the middle, and we've got to do some titrating up on the dose and really finding that sweet spot to get the majority of the weight off. But then sadly, there is that about 10% of people, and I have definitely come across about 10% in our practice, who just don't respond. And it's frustrating, and it is disappointing, but there are ways around that, right? It can be trying different, because there are several different GLP-1s that maybe if you've tried Ozempic, maybe try Zepbound, or, trying different ones, but then also maybe revisiting the idea of having bariatric surgery if you're just truly not responding to the GLP-1 at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you find that those non-responders is there anything behavioral that would lead to the non-responsive weight loss in taking a GLP-1, or does it seem to be more of a genetic kind of thing?
There definitely, I'd say the 10% is not behavioral related. It is that kind of genetic and physiological response type way, because there are plenty of people who do not lose as much weight as they could because they don't combine the tool with the lifestyle change to maximize that result. And that's a main thing of what we do in the nutrition program at Pound of Cure is, I work with people on those behavior changes and really getting the most out, because for most people, they're spending a lot of money and they're dedicating a lot of time and energy to this. So we want to really help set them up for that long-term success. But just like after bariatric surgery, there's that portion control trap where, if we don't work too hard on changing how they're eating, then it's more likely that old habits can come back and we see weight regain. Same thing happens with GLP-1s as well. So it's really important to have that commitment and that mindset change of, this is not just another quick fix. It is,
Yeah.
I'm utilizing this tool in addition to me putting in the effort.
hmm So I think you have an interesting perspective, having worked with both bariatric patients and GLP-1 patients. And GLP-1s are kind of new on the scene. I think, they've been around for decades to treat diabetes, but for weight management, they are relatively new. So I'm curious, if you had a good friend or family member come to you and say, "Hey, I'm really struggling with my weight. I want to do something about it." Which path would you recommend? Bariatric surgery or a GLP-1?
That's a really great question. And I think sadly, a part of it comes down to like insurance coverage, right?
Yeah.
But then also having that conversation of what would help them have the best quality of life. And so for some people, they don't want to have any surgery, and that's perfectly fine, and the medication might be a better option. But other people might not want to be on a medication, have to take an injection every week for the rest of their life, right? And have the idea of having bariatric surgery and it being kind of a one and done, but you still have to put in the work, right? But it's not being on a medication forever. I would really want to dig into more of those questions with them to see what they would want their life to look like. And also depends on how much weight they have to lose, right? So if it's,
Yeah.
a lesser amount of weight, then probably starting with the GLP-1 would be a really good place to start. But what we see in our practice as well is that a lot of people who maybe had the sleeve in the past, and they do experience weight regain or didn't quite get to the overall weight loss that they wanted, supplementing on care plan with GLP-1s, they respond super duper well. And so that's always an option too. But yeah, I think, like I said, it really does depend on what the vision for their life looks like and what's important to them and core values and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up bariatric patients who add this in after the fact. I think anecdotally, that's something that I've seen happening a lot more. Um, in your practice, what would you say is the proportion of bariatric patients who end up needing to add this secondary tool of a GLP-1 or who choose to?
That's a really great question. And I wish I had a really precise percentage to give. But we don't necessarily see many people who've gotten the bypass go on it. It's more so the sleeve patients. And I would say, oh gosh, I wish I could phone a friend and ask Dr. Weiner. Maybe like 20%.
Okay.
But I think also part of it is that from the get-go, that is now starting to be more of an integrated plan of action that Dr. Weiner talks with them about when they first decide what surgery. And it's kind of like, hey, if you decide you want to get the sleeve, this could be something that we actually start sooner to really facilitate and push that weight loss during the honeymoon period. So I think as the time has gone on, it's kind of gotten more integrated in the plan, the care plan for people who do get the sleeve. But I'm thinking about like maybe people who come back years after getting the sleeve to come back and go on the GLP-1.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I do think there's a world where it will be integrated into most bariatric surgery patient plans. It's interesting that Dr. Weiner kind of thinks about the sleeve surgery specifically. I think so I had sleeve surgery and I don't regret it. I think I had a lot of success and I'm very happy I did. But the more I learn about it, the more I think that there are other better options for bariatric surgery that are a little bit more durable in terms of the amount of weight that you can lose and long-term weight loss success. And so it's interesting to think about like, how could the sleeve surgery be positioned as good of an option as those other surgeries when it's combined with this long-term medication approach? And, the sleeve has its advantage of not having the malabsorption component. So your risk of nutritional deficiencies is obviously a little bit less when you're able to absorb everything you eat. So it's just we're living in interesting times where I think bariatric surgery care and obesity medicine is evolving and will continue to evolve in these really interesting and impactful ways.
Absolutely. It's a really fascinating time. It's also, I feel like so much is going to change even when we think about 3 years ago, how much has changed in the past 3 years and in 3 years, who knows where we'll be. What I think is really fascinating as well are all of the other areas that GLP-1s are being shown to have benefit in, like gambling addiction and alcohol addiction and adolescent depression. Like it's mind blowing. So I'm interested to see in maybe 10 years what percentage of the population are going to be on these medications for not just weight loss, but for whatever other ailments.
Yeah, we just had someone, Katie was on the podcast, I think it was last week or the week before, and she started a GLP-1. She's a bariatric surgery patient, started a GLP-1 to help with some regain, but she's also struggled with addiction. She kind of described herself as like a whack-a-mole addict. So like it was a food addiction. And then when she couldn't have food, it was, alcohol and all these other things. And she mentioned what an amazing impact the GLP-1 has had on all of those things. And she said, I thought one of the most impactful things she said was she was like, even if I didn't lose another pound, I would stay on it for all of these other benefits that I'm experiencing. And I think it's so cool. And you're right that 3 years ago, I mean, I had weight loss surgery 3 years ago. I had never even heard of GLP-1s. I didn't know that they existed. They were not used in treatment for anything outside of diabetes. They were not part of like mainstream culture. So it has changed tremendously in the last 3 years. And there's so much research happening, so much really exciting research. And I think these are just incredible medications. And I think it's awesome that you guys are on the forefront of that for weight loss patients.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great.
So I think one of the things with bariatric surgery and GLP-1s is there's a big focus on initial weight loss. So there's these really strict diet progression plans. When you first have surgery, you know exactly what you're eating for the first week and 2 weeks and months and first year. But there isn't always a focus on the long term. And I think that's where most people tend to struggle, is in that long-term maintenance. So what are some of the things that you think bariatric patients or GLP-1 patients can and should be doing in that long-term maintenance phase to maintain their success?
So that is such a great question. And it's something that I actually talk about a lot, in that we want to remove the finish line, viewing this life change as truly for the rest of the life. And I always like to say, whatever you do to lose weight, you have to be prepared to continue to do that long term to maintain that weight loss, which is why as soon as you stop doing Whole30, right, all those 10 pounds came back.
Yeah.
But it might not be in exactly the same capacity, which is why there's such a big emphasis, or why I put such a big emphasis on that honeymoon period and the habits that you are forming during that period. It's not just to lose weight, it's the habits that you're forming to maintain it. And so that goes to your eating habits and your exercise habits and your stress management, and healing that maybe emotional eating component. How can we be more productively cope with emotions? How can we make sure we have a really productive sleep, positive sleep hygiene routine, right? Working on the mindset, working on the self-talk, working on your relationship with food, so that all of these things might feel overwhelming, and we don't need to work on all of them at once, obviously, but having these things in mind, that these are all very valuable and valid things to be thinking about and building habits around, while you are getting that positive reinforcement and while you're building that really great momentum while losing weight. Because, like we said at the beginning, it's so much easier to change habits when you are seeing that momentum and that motivation. So, the emphasis for long term weight maintenance is that mindset shift of, well, how I ate then, maybe in more amounts, right? Just like we were talking about with adding extra volume through the vegetables, focusing on the addition, working with that increased hunger and increased food volume tolerance, where you are adding, where you are honoring your body, but you're focusing on the overall quality. And I like to think of it kind of like a 80-20, right? So 80% of the time, you're eating whole, real, unprocessed foods. That's what you're doing most of the time, because it's aligned with your goals. It makes you feel your best. It helps you maintain your weight. But then life is going to happen. And I don't expect you to never have ice cream or never have a piece of pizza again. But it's about being very intentional and mindful about those planned indulgences, and having it more so a smaller portion of the time, and really enjoying it, savoring it, and thinking about it as that way to stay on track long term with eating according to your new lifestyle. So it's almost like you're not overly restricting yourself, so all you're focusing on are those treat foods that you can't have. No, it's also, again, that mindset shift of, I can have whatever I want, but I'm choosing to eat this way because I know it's aligned with my goals and makes me feel my best. And then every once in a while I can savor this treat and it can be more of a special occasion.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about that, that psychology experiment where it's like they'll say, whatever you do, don't think about a white elephant. And then, of course,
Hmm.
all you can think about is a white elephant. You're like, well, I never thought about a white elephant before, but now I can't stop thinking about the white elephant because I was told not to think about it. And I think the same applies to food. And I was definitely very much this person before where I knew what was healthy, I knew what wasn't. I was constantly trying to diet. So I was constantly telling myself, don't have this thing, don't drink this thing, don't eat this food. And then because that was what I was telling myself, all I could think about was wanting to eat those things. Where now I eat them when I want to, but I'm often like, like my boyfriend bought Oreos and I swear every time I open the fridge, I'm like, oh yeah, we have Oreos. That's cool. Like I completely forget that they're there.
Yeah.
They're not consuming every single thought that I have in my brain because I haven't told myself that I can't have them. If I want one, I have one. If I don't, I don't. And then I'm able to just function without thinking about it. And I think that is, I think that's such an important approach that people maybe don't understand if you haven't ever really experienced that true sense of balance. But that I think is what really helps kind of in that long term, making this a lifestyle change, not just a short term weight loss thing.
That's so liberating, right?
It is. Yeah, it really is. I'm curious if you could. So, bariatric patients are always concerned about regain, right? That's like the number one fear, I think, in every bariatric surgery patient's mind. You're like, I went through this major surgery. I did all this work to lose all this weight. I'm so afraid I'm going to gain it back. If you could kind of think about your patients and think about your experience, are there one or two things that you could point to that you would say, yeah, I could probably predict this person's going to regain weight based on these behaviors?
Mm-hmm. First off, I want to say that a lot of people experience weight regain after surgery. And it's not because you're a failure. It's not because the surgery failed. It's none of those things. And we don't want to put so much emphasis on it, but we want to take it as the opportunity to pause, zoom out, take an objective look at what's going on, and have that kind of hard look and self-reflection to say, okay, what's actually going on here? And I see weight regain for a couple of reasons. Maybe a new medication. Maybe you used to have an active job and now there's a sedentary job. Maybe you went too hard in the gym and now you're injured and you can't be as active. But 9 times out of 10, the weight regain comes from food habits, right?
Yeah.
And I mentioned before the portion control trap. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the portion control trap, it's where you experience positive reinforcement from seeing weight loss during the honeymoon period. So, right after surgery or while you're on your GLP-1 and you're losing the majority of your weight, but not focusing on changing the eating habits, but just eating less. So maybe it's like, you know, we talked about those treat foods that, we can have in moderation every now and then, but it's eating those same maybe like highly processed foods, foods that we know aren't aligned with the goal of weight loss, but because the surgery is doing its thing right afterwards and you're only eating a couple bites and you can't eat a lot of it, but then like we talked about before, that hunger comes back, the volume can come back, and so then that portion control aspect of the surgery or the GLP-1 isn't as acute, then those portions of those same unhealthy foods come back in bigger and bigger portions. That's where we see weight regain. So something else that I do attribute weight regain to is also like not utilizing that period of time during the honeymoon period to work on productive coping strategies for stress or for other emotions, right? That work towards healing that relationship with food or your mindset, or stuck in that mindset of this isn't, like what we tell ourselves is our reality, right? And so
Yeah.
if it becomes this fear of, oh my gosh, this isn't gonna work, and this isn't gonna work, nothing ever works for me, and you're kind of like stuck in that cycle. That's not going to be the majority of people, but that cycle can have a very real effect on that
Yeah.
result. But 9 times out of 10, it definitely can come back to eating habits. And I always, again, want to just reiterate, doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean everything's out the window. It's the opportunity to pause and pivot. We need to pause, take a hard look at what's going on. What can I actually do to make this change? And it doesn't and shouldn't be everything all at once, because it didn't take, we didn't change all of these things with the flip of a switch. So working with a dietitian or a coach, or just working on it with yourself, but having that approach of going back to those behavior-based goals, turning your habits around, and it's not too late. You can absolutely still lose that weight, but we need to have that self-reflection and take action towards it.
Yeah, I really like that term, the portion control trap. I've never heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense why I think, I think a lot of people think bariatric surgery works because you just can't eat much. And you're right, that might be true for a little while, but that's not going to be true forever. And it really is just a tool to give you the time and space to change your habits. I've never heard it phrased like that, the portion control trap. But if you don't change your habits, you just shrink them down to the portion size you can eat now, then yeah, it would make sense why that weight is going to come back so easily. So I think that's a cool way of thinking about it. And I also like what you said about, don't do everything all at once. Just focus on making small changes. I experienced a little bit of regain about a year ago. Not a lot, but enough where I was like, what's going on here? And my default as a person who spent 30 years dieting was to like go to extremes. I was like, where's the Weight Watchers clinic? How do I download the app? And, what do I need to do to start like cutting out all these foods? And then I had to like take a step back and be like, okay, girlfriend, like chill out for a second. Let's just like look at what you're doing. And what I realized was that some of the things that I was, let's say like certain foods I would only ever eat when we would go out to eat, which was few and far between, I started bringing those into our house and then I would have them at home. And it was little things like that. And I was like, okay, let's just make those little tiny changes. Or walking. I used to walk a ton. I had kind of stopped walking as much. So I started making like very little changes, did not drastically change my life, didn't sign up for Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig or whatever, my first reaction was. And I was able to lose the little bit of regain that I had put on. But I think it's so deeply ingrained in anyone who has lived diet culture for most of your life to like, when you see a problem, to be like, what's the most extreme solution that I can find? And it's a good reminder that sometimes all you need to do is make one tiny little tweak to see the result that you're trying to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
So one of the things I think you're very good at is distilling what can be complex nutritional advice into really easy to understand, actionable pieces of insight. What is one thing that you think most people get wrong when it comes to nutrition advice?
Oh, gosh, this is a really loaded, there's so many directions to go here, but what's kind of just populating in my mind is the first one that I think is really important is that it doesn't have to be so complicated, right? Whether it's like an influx of information online because of your own research or because of social media algorithms or whatever, we've just or people trying to make lots and lots of money by overcomplicating it and saying you need this special thing, right?
Yeah.
It we need to get back to basics, and just like you said, those small tweaks. So what I think a lot of people get wrong is that they overcomplicate it, and it can be really challenging to simplify it because it feels like, oh well, that's just too simple, right? But if we go back to creating lasting habit change, that has to be built from I feel like I've said it so many times, that positive reinforcement, building momentum, feeling successful because we think that we have to wait for motivation to take action to see results. But in fact, we need to take action whether we feel motivated or not. And that's where the habit formation comes in, taking action because it's just a habit, it's just what you do. And then you see the results. And it's not always going to be results on the scale. That's going to be results in getting a better night's sleep, seeing more energy levels, not having cravings, that food waste going down, yada, yada. And using that as the motivation and using that motivation to continue fueling that action taking. And so by going back to simplifying your goals to, okay, right now, oh gosh, I'm only getting 3,000 steps a day. Instead of, oh, I have to be at 10,000 steps a day, it's let's just work for 4. And
Yep.
again, having that very simple strategic step that we can build upon, create a behavior based goal, turn it into a habit, set a new goal, turn it into a habit, stack those habits, stack those habits, stack those habits so that over time you can see how much of your lifestyle and your habits you've transformed, but not in a way that's overwhelming. We have plenty of information, we have plenty of things taking up space in our brain and overwhelming us. So, this should be something that is alleviating stress, not adding stress.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such good advice. And I think, you know, the concept of habits, we hear it all the time, but the way you described that was, I think, very powerful, that a habit is just an action that you do because it's a habit. You don't have to, it's not effortful, right? And I think that's really where that success comes in, is when those habits become automatic. They don't take the same amount of effort that they take. It's like brushing your teeth. No one's like, struggling. Well, not no one. Some people are. Most people don't struggle to brush their teeth twice a day because it's just what you do. It requires no mental energy. You don't think about it. You just get up and you do it. And that is the same approach that we need to take when it comes to our health and nutrition and exercise. It's like, how can you get those things to be less effortful so that you're not spending every single day, struggling, trudging through mud, trying to live this healthy lifestyle, but it's just kind of this thing that's like coming automatically. And I think that's so powerful.
And it goes back to, after you have those habits formed, life can do what life does and throw curveballs at you, and you can go on vacation and you can go out to eat and you can survive the holidays and you can be thrown in all these different situations, but you're still going to brush your teeth twice a day. So
Yep.
when it's just what you do, yes, there's still going to be challenges, of course, but you can go on vacation and do the things that are just your habits because you like the way it makes you feel. And when you don't do it, you feel yucky and you don't want to feel that way. And it's so second nature at this point. And that is also something, going back to that long term success and maintenance, it becomes what you do and you don't have to try as hard.
Yeah. I wish that was something I could have understood when I was struggling with my weight. And I wish more people who are struggling understood, is like, there was never a holiday season that wasn't immensely stressful to me, because every decision that I had to make throughout that holiday season was hard, because I wanted to eat the cookies and the treats, but I knew I wasn't supposed to because I was trying to lose weight and I had already gained 20 pounds that year and I wasn't trying to gain more, except I always did. The last couple of years going through the holidays has been basically like just life, like normal life. I haven't had that same feeling of stress, and I've definitely, there it's a little different because there's a lot more treats and things that are not normally around, but it has not felt like that same overwhelming amount of stress and like mentally taxing experience that it was in the past, because I think because I really do have a lot of those habits so deeply ingrained that it's like, that's just what I do. And if I want to have a cookie, I'll have a cookie. And if I don't, then I won't. But I'm still going to do all of the other things that I do just as part of my normal day to day. And it really does relieve a lot of the emotional feelings around things like holidays or vacations or things like that.
Mhm. Mhm. That mental load is taken
Yeah.
away. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to understand unless you've lived it, but it's probably the best part of this whole journey for me.
Great.
So I know you are very passionate about food and cooking. How does that inform how you work with your patients?
Mm. It does not come in handy when people are asking for recipes on specific measurements, because a lot of things that I do are just kind of like made up on the fly.
Yeah.
But um, but with that being said, it comes down to enjoying what you're eating, right? Think about like, oh, like getting so excited to go out to try a new restaurant, right? You want to get so excited about what you're making at home. You don't want to force feed yourself chicken and broccoli every day because that's what's on your meal plan. No, like get create. And I think that's where like my excitement and passion for it shines through as well, because I'm not a very creative person in terms of like art or music, but that's my creative outlet and I enjoy it. And if you can bring that joy and that excitement and that creativity into the kitchen and genuinely get excited about the healthy meals that you are making and how you can recreate, your favorite whatever meal that maybe you used to have at a restaurant and now you want to make it your own version at home. And I think that is something that can be really powerful in terms of, again, that sustainability piece is having fun with it, enjoying what you're making, and you'll always have your go-tos, right? But that's something I really enjoy to share with people too, is like, listen, we want to be eating delicious, flavorful, exciting meals. Not every meal has to be like that, of course. But bringing that fun into it, I think, is really key.
Yeah, I love that. I'm not a good cook. I know how to make one thing, and it's stuffed peppers, and I make it every single week, and that's
Be
basically all
like
I eat.
enchilada stuffed peppers
Yeah.
and marinara stuffed peppers and
Yeah,
buffalo stuffed peppers.
pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much me. What advice would you have for someone who wants to learn how to cook or get more creative in the kitchen?
Yeah, I would say use Pinterest, use the internet or, social media, whatever. Pick something that looks exciting to you, but it doesn't have to be like a super duper gourmet thing. So maybe pick something that is 5 ingredients or less, and that could be a Pinterest search, right? But I think just increasing your familiarity, just like going into the gym, right? It might be uncomfortable and you feel awkward and it's like a little bit self-conscious in there at first because you don't know what you're doing. Same thing goes for in the kitchen. The more that you show up and the more that you try new things and the more comfortable you get. But I would just say you don't need to overcomplicate it. It can be, building your meals around your protein and your fiber and flavor. And so those are the three components that you can mix and match and get creative with. But I do think that trying a lot of patients, when we're working on increasing variety or if they're feeling stuck in their meal prep, one of the goals that we often set is just try one new recipe a week. So it's find something that looks fun, try it out, and then over time you start to build that mental library of go-to meals. Maybe you don't ever make that recipe again, but you tried it and it's something that you either liked or didn't, and maybe you found another one and that becomes part of your rotation. So you just need to try and build that comfortability.
Yeah, I like that idea of trying one new thing a week. And I will say, as a stuffed pepper connoisseur, once you make something enough times, it becomes really, really, really easy to make it because you know exactly what ingredients you need. It's easy to go to the store and get them. And so I think it's just like anything else. Like the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. And I'm telling myself this too, because I need to learn how to make more than just my handful of varieties of stuffed peppers. But I like that idea of trying one new thing and kind of like developing this little catalog of like go-to meals that you do them enough, they become so easy that you don't even need your grocery list. You can just, exactly what you need, exactly how to make it. And I think that's what makes eating healthy easy and also enjoyable, as having those things that you really do. And I'm with you. I'm not a chicken and broccoli, plain, gross food. I want to eat good food. Thankfully, my boyfriend cooks mostly, so I'm lucky there.
Great.
But I should learn a little bit more too. Well, Zoe, thank you so much for being here tonight. This has been such a great conversation. I've learned so much. I know our listeners are going to learn so much. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to share with us.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. And I'm really happy we had this time in the conversation. And if anybody wants to reach out, whether to, see Dr. Weiner in our practice or join me for a nutrition session, support group, etc., definitely feel free to head over to poundofcureweightloss.com. And we've got all sorts of resources. We've got free resources. We've got our podcast too, if you want to listen to that. So lots of good stuff over there.
Yeah, and we will put links to all of those things in the show notes. Pound of Cure is also on Instagram, and they post some really great content over there. So we'll give you all the links to those things. If you want to find our podcast on Instagram, we are at Former Fat Friend Pod. I'm at Maintaining Casey, and we will see you next time. Bye.